Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hello and welcome to this episode of ZNL. Today I am very excited to have a special guest and an old friend, Benita Lipps. Benita has been in the world of communications, science, and associations for many decades. And we've met in previous incarnations. I think this is a very Brussels thing where you're in one role and then you change and then we meet again. How are you today, Benita?
I'm fantastic. Thank you. It's fantastic to be here again.
Excellent. So, Benita, you've had, as I mentioned, a lot of experience with different organizations. But recently, you have taken a very bold step and you have launched your own company. So first of all, congratulations for that. And the company is Novia. So why don't you tell us what Novia is and why you decided to launch it?
Yeah, thank you. So I think Novia is the reason that I came to Brussels and the reason, why we met as well. So I find that in Brussels, there's so many people who have amazing visions, who are incredibly smart and who want to change the world. But quite often they lack the infrastructure, the funding, the systems to sustainably do that. And what Novia is trying to do is to be that backbone, the people who make sure that the governance works, that the organization works. So we want to help impact-driven organizations to really achieve as much as they can, while sort of keeping their back free and making sure that the system is in order.
So I'm hearing a little bit about the association management world. Now, I think that the support you're offering is this, but specifically, what kind of customers are you going for? Who are your ideal clients?
So from my last position, we were working as an association management company, as an AMC. So we really were helping associations to manage their secretariats, but also their strategy and their projects. What we find is that the challenges that we see in associations also apply to other impact-driven organizations. So people who don't do what they do for the money, but who do that mostly because they want to achieve change, and organizations who do that normally with not unlimited funding. So that can be NGOs, that can be nonprofits, that can be informal networks that think that they want to change the world and who need that help to focus on the mission, but make sure that there is a system behind it that's sustainable and that works.
So a few months ago, I guess beforehand, you woke up and decided, I have to launch this new company. What motivated you personally to do this?
I think I always wanted to do that in every job that I've done and in every job that we've met. I'm coming from a background of educators and artists, and I'm not the person who loves to be on stage. I'm the person who wants to cheer them on and be in the back and make sure that works well. So in all the different jobs where I've done that, I noticed that the business model wasn't set up to really do that well. So, either there was a need to focus too much on admin, or there was a need to focus on making too much money for people. And the reason why we decided to do that now under Novia is because we're trying to have a business model where we can be partners to these organizations and where we can all live well. But ultimately, we're doing this together as partners to make the world a better place. And I know that sounds very big, but I think doing this in a professional and structural way is something that's really missing, and that is so critical to achieve success.
Now, it sounds very interesting. I'm always fascinated. I have conversations with Brussels-based entrepreneurs, people who start their own company, and there are quite a few. There is a community, but at the same time, Brussels is not exactly the Silicon Valley of Europe or a place where people are all into startups. There's a lot of kind of risk averse institutions and organizations. So what made you kind of take that leap? Was it because you wanted the freedom to decide, or you felt this needed to exist, or you just had this urge to do something that was your own, or something
I think
else?
I think it's a little bit of all of that. I think over the last year, I was like, I need to do something else. I'm turning 50 this year, so I need to get this right. This is the time to do it or not. And then there was another really fortunate thing that happened. So as you know, before this, I worked for DGA and managed their association management practice. And when I talked to DGA, we decidedly joined. We decided together that the best way to move forward is to use the clients that we work under DGA and give them a new home. So DGA decided, why don't we give that work to Benita, to Novia, because that's where they can get more and they can be served better, and we can still continue working together on these clients, on these associations, but as two different entities with different specialities. And of course, that's an amazing thing to start with, right? To have this privilege to be given the clients that I developed, that I found, that I love, that I work with, and just bring them over into a model that I think works much better for them. And of course, that is something I've been trying to develop in my last job. And now I can do all these things that I always wanted to do better under my own legal entity.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. Now, you've been working obviously extensively with associations of all shapes and sizes. What is it that you've observed as big changes in the last decade? Obviously, there's so many changes in the last couple of years that it seems quite intense. But I mean, how do you see associations being transformed with all the technology that's happening, and especially AI? I mean, do you see some big changes or resistance to change? What is happening in your mind in the association space?
I think they've changed incredibly. When I came into this space, I was still the only woman in the room. It was still quite often an old boys network. It was a group of people who met and decided to then formalize what they do. Now there's an entirely new generation of members who want these associations to be professional, who have very, very clear ideas what they need to deliver. And who expect them to actually show the impact and do that in a professional way. So that creates a completely different dynamic, in my opinion. You no longer have people who just meet because they want to have drinks, and then there's one person that they can talk to when it comes to advocacy. They now have to work with each other. They have to work with their members. They have to be professional. They have to be agile. They have to understand strategy. They have to understand communication, because they're working in a much more complex ecosystem where there's just not one person, and then all your problems go away. And I think that's really exciting. And like you say, the last thing that happened, of course, is AI. And in my team in Novia, we defined ourselves as digital first and also AI first, because I find there is incredible value if you use AI well, for things like creating minutes, for things like managing certain types of data, for helping to brainstorm on projects as a tool. So my team uses this extensively, within clear guidance, to make the work better. And we're trying to, we see a lot of associations who are incredibly curious and incredibly scared. And I think this is the barrier we have to overcome. The curious is good, the scared's bad. I understand that we're the keeper of such critical information if we're associations. There's member data, everybody's worried about antitrust. There's GDPR and other privacy legislation. And of course, all of this is very relevant to the way that you use AI. But I don't think any of that should stand in the way of not doing it. So, we have associations who go like, we can't have an auto meeting transcription tools because that is about antitrust and that will never happen. And then there's poor people who are still slugging away, taking notes in person. And it's just not necessary. So I think there's a lot of education to do and a lot of really amazing opportunities on a very basic way, and then also in a very creative way.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned fear, and I think there is a kind of cultural frame in Brussels which is resistant to change, like conservative, which is not necessarily. I mean, there are a lot of different cultural frames, but that would be a dominant one. And that was the same with social media. When associations didn't want to use it at the beginning. And it's interesting what you said about the old boys club, because I remember people saying that associations were the place where people were kind of retired from companies to kind of just, do something else. But I think now clearly a lot of associations are driving critical issues for the industry. So it's no longer, they matter a lot more. But coming back to the fear, I mean, I see, the fear of change, which is about mindset, and it's about risk aversion. Like, I don't want to take a risk. So I prefer to do nothing than to do something that might not work. What do you see as the biggest fear, the biggest blocker for associations to change, with AI and technology?
I think it is this risk aversion, and I think that's baked into the association system. Because if you work for an association, you have a multitude of bosses and people to report to, who not necessarily the people who know the most about your daily work. So you have to work with boards who might come from a completely different cultural background, a different organizational setting, and have very different compliance issues. Or you have individuals who just come out of an operating theater and are now there to advise you on the best way to structure your AI strategy. So this is a hard place to make decisions. There's a lot of voices, and I think a lot of associations try very hard to guide them on the things that matter the most. And maybe convincing people that AI is the future is just a very hard task. And like you say, I think it was the same for social media, right? There is just a time where people have to learn it and have to experience it, that we get to a point of adoption and not being afraid of that. So I think the more the people who are in working groups, who are in boards, understand how good AI is, the easier it'll be to convince them. But that also requires secretariats to have all the arguments on the table. And on the one hand, I think this is like, no, we can do this in a compliant way. No, not all of our data will be owned by Google or by ChatGPT. And also, these are the very concrete use cases that we can try, and that will create instant value. And again, for me, I think the biggest one is to go like, do you want your minutes in a week, or do you want your minutes in an hour? Minutes are like fish; they just start stinking if you don't get them. So I think we can test that, and it's fun. And what we're trying to do is to convince people that's actually fun, and that like give it a go. But yeah, I don't know how did you do it for social media, because it's a hard sell in Brussels. You're right.
Yeah, it's interesting, with social media. Obviously, we started talking about it a long time ago, when Facebook and, first channels appeared on the market. And at that point, it was like, this is for teenagers, this is for kids, this is not for serious people. And then it took a while. And I think for some organizations, by the time they said, okay, we'll do a Twitter channel, Twitter had become X. And then they said, no, we can't do X. It's a terrible place. We shouldn't do that. So it's really interesting. I mean, the problem with the decision-making pace is where, it takes so long to make a decision, because those associations are often structured so that it's much easier for people to say no than for them to actually take action. This is inherent in the structure. But one thing I think is that, given the current world we live in, with the tariffs and the wars and the changes that we experience on a weekly, monthly, daily basis, it doesn't work to be moving at that speed, because basically, you can't wait 6 months before you respond to a tariff that might change after 3 days. Now, I'm curious with your clients, with the clients that you're working with. I know you've just started your 1 quarter in, but are you looking for clients that are much more agile, perhaps because they're smaller than the bigger corporate associations? Do they move faster, or do they have the same characteristics as the association world that you know?
Well, we are looking for clients who are interested in change, right? We cannot convince clients that what we can offer is something valuable. So we don't like to work with clients who we need to convince that we can add value. I think that's the most important thing. And I think that implies a certain level of either agility or a certain level of desperation. I think these are the two things that can happen. And I think this challenge with agility and with making decisions quickly is mostly because the systems are not there to allow them to safely make decisions. There's not enough information, and they're not guided in a way to do that. So I'm deeply I don't think I've ever talked with a non-smart board member or a non-smart association secretariat person. It's just that they are embedded in systems that discourage them to make these decisions, to be agile. And I think that's where we can come in and go like, no, we what you're looking for, this agility, this curiosity to move forward, that's in all of us. We just need to give them a space and a system and a structure where they can explore that. So they need to be open for.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, culture and structure is a huge constraint on people, what they can do. Even if they are individually incredibly capable, in a certain environment, suddenly you can't do things, which I guess is also part of why you've decided to start your own organization, because then you make the decisions, you make the mistakes, you make the right calls or the wrong calls, but you can't blame an organization or a system. One thing I found interesting in some of your comments about associations, and I think this is a very interesting question, which is, what is it that an association is, and how does it differ from a movement or a network? Because a lot of the time, because actually we've worked on multiple initiatives which were not an association, but actually this was a campaign to achieve an end. But sometimes it's a community that can then communicate on certain topics, and we're bringing people together. And I think association is only one of the segments there, and the NGO world, knows this much better than the, let's say, association world in Brussels, which is that you can achieve things by creating very loose networks of individuals. You can combine different organizations into a kind of campaign. So how do you approach that? What is the difference for you between, say, an association, a movement, and a network?
It's a really good question. And I think this is also why in Novia we stopped focusing solely on associations, because all these things are interconnected. And ultimately, like you say, if we want to achieve something, it doesn't really matter that much. Well, we need to find the best format to get these outcomes, not, the ASBL, the title of the legal entity. And this is something that I think makes it harder for associations now. If you have a movement, you have an entire engaged audience which is behind that, or engaged. That's not even an audience. It's a group of engaged people who want to drive something. If you have a network, again, I think you have people who decide to come together over a certain topic. And I think an association can be all of these things or none of these things. And tragically, if they're none of these things, then I think they're becoming something very, very stale and useless. So for me, what legally differentiates an association is that it's a legal entity of people who have decided to put it in law that they are there to come together, and they are there because they believe that if they work together, they can get better outcomes. And I think in a time when everything becomes so relative and things change so quickly, that also has a value to have an organization and people who are committed to this. I think that is fantastic, because like you say, they're also mostly Belgian companies. It's not easy to do that, but there are people who are not just joining a movement for a day. There's people who commit themselves to run these incredibly complex non-profit SMEs who have hundreds of different stakeholders that they have to be accountable for. And I think in the best case scenario, that makes them an incredibly powerful movement, one that you can rely on. And of course, in the worst cases, you have an empty shell that is nothing but an articles of association filed somewhere in a dusty cabinet.
Yeah, and I think the issue is often the people in these associations are really very knowledgeable about topics. So they know, sometimes you have real experts who know about this very specific topic, but it doesn't mean they know how to run a network / movement / association. So they might, spend a lot of time discussing the very details of the issue, but then, at the end, it doesn't do anything because they're not communicating it, they're not mobilizing people. So I think that, maybe the model that we're looking for is a kind of agile association, which is an association that can actually change structure based on what it's trying to accomplish. So sometimes it's an official representation of an industry, but sometimes it's just a specific campaign for 3 months to really go after that particular topic, mobilize people, and then disband into something else. So I think it's having that ability to have multiple shapes that might be critical. Now, one thing that I think makes this even more difficult today is that I think one of the primary objectives and roles of these associations is actually to communicate information about the sector that you represent, because we are now living, in this age of post-truth, fake news, disinformation. So what do you think? Because you came from a science background, you had, when we first met, you were involved in the science conversation and the conversation between the media and scientists. And at that time, I think there was a consensus that, science was a good thing, and that if you could articulate scientific questions to the public, that was also a good thing. Now, we seem to be wondering about whether there is, in fact, a scientific fact that we can agree, let alone communicate. So how do you feel about the disinformation space we live in today? How bad do you think the situation is? And where do we go from here?
To me, this is deeply concerning, because, like you say, I grew up being in awe of science and the way that you can change the world by doing good research and then getting it peer reviewed and then getting it checked and getting it replicated. And this is the model that I aspire to, and this is the people that I wanted to help. And I'm actually coming from working with artists, like managing bands, and then I thought, like, that's sweet, but they're not really changing the world. They might make a huge impact, but is it really worth my time? So I moved to science, and I feel now we're getting back that you probably have a lot more impact if you make noise and I don't know, you do a cool video of yourself. And being a scientist is almost uncool, I think. And to me, that is very hard to decipher, because it's not an attitude that I can really understand. And I think it's getting worse and worse, because one thing is that the attitude is changing, that there are people that are actively promoting a world where information doesn't matter and truth is relative, and truth is related to power, which is even more scary, I think. If you have power, then the truth is yours, and you don't even have to hide that. So that is incredibly scary. And the other thing is, I think, when we see this AI slop that is now starting to overwhelm social networks. If I go on YouTube and half the videos are just utter AI crap, if I go on Instagram and I'm looking at garden pictures and they're all AI generated and they're getting better and better, then there is not even, how do you even identify truth anymore? So I find that very scary, and I don't have an answer. How do you deal with that in your job, in your profession?
Well, I think, there are two lenses to look at this. The first one, obviously, is the societal one, and to say, okay, where are we in our understanding of information and what's causing that? And the other one is as a communicator, where you say, look, my job is to get the message through and to try to target that. So I think on the first point, and if you read Yuval Noah Harari and his latest book, Nexus, he talks a lot about how we live in this age of fragmented truth, and that the social media fragmentation, the fact that we live in our echo chambers, or it's not even an echo chamber, it's just like we are reading the information that the algorithm is feeding us because that's what we've clicked on, so it's giving us more of that, and that's creating these fragmented perceptions from people who are Republican, Democrats, etc. So I think that's a reality. I think that we are getting used to that, or let's say we are getting to understand this more. I think I think reasonably intelligent, educated people now have a lot more skepticism when they see things on social media that maybe they had a few years ago, because they say, okay, I know it could be fake. I know whether it's AI, deep fake, or something else, doesn't really matter. What you need to do is to be skeptical. I think people are beginning to do that. I think that in some schools, they're beginning to talk about that. I think this is really important, that we need as citizens to start learning about what is true and what is fake. And actually, I have this view that I know is not always popular, but I think that AI can help you to fact check things. I use it all the time. I run the query on the link and I say, show me if this is true, show me the sources, and I make my own judgment. I'm not asking ChatGPT to decide for me. But I think AI is a really great fact-checking tool. So I have a kind of kernel of optimism. But of course, it could just be optimism because the biggest voices are dominating the conversation. Now, from a communication perspective, the second point is, I believe that indeed, we need to understand which buttons to push to get the message to the audience, and that is emotion. A strong message with a strong emotional component is going to get a lot more traction than a factually correct message with no emotion attached. So as a communicator, you need to get that. You need to use social media to bring your ecosystem with you and amplify the message. And in fact, I just coming back to your initial point that you came from art to science. I wonder if, in fact, it's the art is the real way now to communicate. I mean, it's much more of an art than a science, in the sense that it's finding the emotion, finding the story, which is what an artist is all about. So do you think your art background, and tell me a little bit about how did you go from art to science, and did you support any bands that we know about? we need to know.
Yeah, well. My mom is a ballet teacher, and I was on stage since I was a little child. And there is a magic to being involved in creating art, whether that's performing arts or whether that's visual arts, that always got me hooked, and that I love. And so I decided that I needed to start as management, because again, I was like, okay, like that is cool, but then if nobody sees it, nobody does it, if there's no money for it, then like nothing happens with that. So that is obviously something that didn't exist in Germany, because there was a lot of money and you just got funding at that time. So I went to the UK, and I, for some reason, ended up at the Paul McCartney Fame School, studying under him, getting my degree from him, meeting the Beatles, doing all the crazy jumping in the streets stuff, being completely brainwashed in the beauty that is performance and finding your voice. I was involved in launching one band that was called A1. That was like, I think it was in the British charts for like 1 week. So that's my only claim to fame. But then I noticed that this is really fun and amazing. But at the same time, if you babysit a bunch of incredibly fun 21-year-olds, and you have to figure out where they all ended up and why they're still drunk at 9 in the morning, and why things don't happen. Then in the long run, this is fun a couple of times, and the magic and the fairy dust is enough. But in the long term, it was like, no, that's not what I want to put my time in. So I thought, what's the exact opposite of that? And I think that was science for me then. And I was like, okay, it's probably not as exciting, less partying at 3 o'clock in the morning, even though you'd be surprised. But it's about evidence. It's not about your voice. It's about what we then thought was concrete truth. So I like your point that maybe we're getting back to that and how critical that is and how important emotion is. But then I wonder, it still has to be the hook that gets you to the truth, if we still believe that there's truth, or the evidence or the data. And ironically, we speak more about evidence-driven advocacy at the same time in the EU. So I don't know how you do that, because I get you can get the people with the right kind of emotional hook, but then you need to have the punch behind it, right?
Yeah, I think the key thing, for good communication is to combine the strong case and the facts and the evidence, but then give them a really emotional envelope, like an emotional story that you can then use as a hook to bring people in. And I think that is our job as communicators, because we won't get attention, especially in this very crowded environment. There's just too much going on that's driving the news cycle every second. So if you want to break through, you need a story that's not, hey, here we drive the economy by 3% of this and 5% of that. It's just really dull. You have to say, this person got this story, saved their life, helped someone. There has to be a personal story, which is, by the way, where social media, is now the main channel to deliver news. We've seen the Reuters Media Institute report saying that basically now I think 60% of adults are getting their news from social media. So where are you getting your news from? Is it social media? And what is your favorite social media channel?
I'm not getting my news yet from social media. I'm trying to subscribe to several newspapers and news outlets across the different countries where I live or lived. So that's like a bit of UK, a bit of Germany, a bit of Belgium, a bit of Switzerland, and a little bit of US for good measure. Because that is what I'm comfortable with and what I grew up with. I do really like LinkedIn. It's a place that I find inspiring and interesting without. And still adding value to my professional work, and where I can also see that associations and the nonprofit can do a lot. I like the fact that we can have individual voices promoting the campaigns and the causes, and I think that links back to your point about movements, right? You can't be an association on LinkedIn not have allies and ambassadors and people who amplify what you do. I love Twitter. I was such a huge fan. I thought it was the best place in the world. I think that was still in my arts days, when I reached out to really famous people and to the Arts Council, and the people answered, and you go like, oh my God. And then, you're awake at 6 in the morning and are excited about who tweets you back. And that was amazing. That felt like an amazing period of social media, and I still love it for that. I don't think it's that anymore. I stopped being on X. I tried some of the others, and I can't get that enthusiasm back. And I think I don't get TikTok. I feel I might be too old for TikTok. So that's it. But I have a lot of people who tell me, yeah, I'm getting my news from Instagram, or I'm following this person on Instagram. So I feel it's a place to explore.
Yeah, I think for me, LinkedIn, as we were discussing, is the now dominant channel in the EU bubble and in Brussels. X is still there as a kind of news repository. It's declining, but it's still there. And then we have Instagram, which is rising, and TikTok following behind that. I'm exploring all of them. I'm spending more time on LinkedIn. and still checking out X because there's a lot of news that's being shared on that platform, whether we like it or not. And Instagram, I think, is very interesting as a consumer, actually, more than as a producer. But I think it's going to be the future of, the next generation of communicators used to it, comfortable with the language. I think TikTok is having I mean, they're kind of clones of each other in some ways. But TikTok's very good at picking up what you do and giving you more of that. So unfortunately, I feel like if you click on stories that you're vaguely curious about and then it gives you more, you just don't know how to get out. My daughter was telling me is you need to deliberately really only like the things you want to see more of, and don't watch things if you don't want to get more of them, which is very difficult because it's like you're going like, I'm just brain rotting a little bit and seeing what's happening there. So I think it's very challenging. As you said, I'm also not a huge TikTok fan, but I find, for example, because on Instagram there are a lot of people producing very good quality, which, by the way, I think is also true of TikTok. But in the bubble, there's a community. I was involved with the EU masterclass that Sevim launched and ran. Sevim is one of the Instagram influencers. And I saw a lot of people very interested in telling stories on Instagram about EU policy, about very specific areas of EU policy, and doing that quite competently. I mean, she's a great model with 40,000 followers on Instagram, but around her were other people who are coming up. And I think in the NGO space, this is actually a very powerful tool. So I think you need to combine LinkedIn and Instagram probably to be successful. Now, when you meet people who are young and maybe they've just graduated or maybe they're starting their studies, what is your advice to them? When they ask you, what should I do next, and what is your advice on how to approach this new crazy changing world?
I think more than ever, it's critical to connect with other people, to do that by getting your voice heard online and finding your voice on LinkedIn, on Instagram, wherever you have that. So to create an authentic brand. And I think that brand isn't authentic in the way that you do everything that you do, but you do the parts that you would like others to see. But I think you also have to do that in person. And Brussels has always been a city where you meet each other, right? And where you meet new people, and where the nice people and the smart people are very willing to have conversations with you. And I think we just met this week accidentally like 2 times. So it happens, right? And it's wonderful to meet young people and to listen to them. So for people to come to these occasions and to have a voice and to talk to everyone is something that I would advise. And I'm really impressed because wherever I go, I meet people who just come and say hello. And I would have never dared that when I was 22. So I don't think they need my advice there. I can just say congratulations and continue doing this. So I think that's really critical. I think, what else?
Yeah, in terms of skills and things that you think they need to learn to be successful, what would be the one skill and one area of knowledge that they would need?
I think so. This is my Cat Stevens father and son analogy. For many years, I listened to this song, and I heard the voice of the son who goes like, "We have to change the world, and like, why don't we do something about it?" And for the last couple of years, I'm on the father side, and I'm like, you have to relax, you have to take things easy, you have to listen to people, and I feel. Sadly, probably everybody over 40 will say that, but I think there is a need, especially in these very dividing times, to continue listening to people and to continue having conversations, and not to exclude a person or a point of view because it's not aligned with your values. Because I think normally there's always an interesting person, an interesting point behind that. So having the graciousness to listen and to be interested and to think about it is super critical, and today more than ever before.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying this in a moment when polarization is increasing to extreme levels in the US, and we're seeing some of this in Europe. So how do you think you can fight that? How do you change, how do you avoid falling into the polarization trap that our whole society seems to be falling into?
I think you have to conquer that with patience and with kindness. So I always try to talk to the person that I would like the other person to be, rather than the person that I see in front of me. And quite often that gets them a little bit closer to allowing themselves to be that person, right? So if there's a person who's very clear on their points, who's maybe discriminatory or rude, I think being kind and giving the benefit of the doubt and pushing them in the right direction by reacting to that, not by rejecting it, but to get them back into the fold. I think that is something that's very helpful. But I think that's easier if you've done that for a few years than if you're 24 and you're continuously exposed to people who are prejudiced or difficult or don't listen. So I think it's easy for me to say that, and harder for somebody who's at the beginning of their career.
Excellent. And just finish off on those questions. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the association world and the communicators world in Brussels, at this point in time?
I think we touched upon this. To me, the biggest challenge is to remain agile in such a complex world and in such a fast-moving world. I think it's becoming ever more complex, ever more connected, and associations are not the vehicles that are set up for that. At the same time, I think there are people who can do that and who can agilely, like you said, create new networks, create initiatives within the organization. So finding these new models within a system that I think is still very valuable is what we need to do, and making sure that we stay up to date, we find the right allies. We understand that things are complex, but we don't let us stop that from actually making an impact and having a voice. That'll be the challenge we have to tackle.
Excellent. So now it's time for our recommendations.
Recommendations of the week.
And there we go. We had our jingle. So Benita, you have a book recommendation for us. What is it?
I do. So my book recommendation is When We're in Charge, from Amanda Littman. And it's a book from a young American who talks about what it's like to be a leader in this new time. And I found it incredibly inspiring and incredibly exciting. Because I don't know about you, but I think a lot of the management books and how to be a leader that are still popular are very dated. And they don't give us answers about how you can be an authentic self and a leader at the same time, and how you can be a public persona and a private person, and a leader and also follow people on Instagram. And this book addresses all these issues and encourages people to find their leadership voice, not in a sort of 7 habits of successful people way, but in a very authentic way. And I find that incredibly motivating and important, not just for the next generation, but also for our generation.
Fantastic. My recommendation this week is a movie recommendation. It's a movie called Kika by Alex Bouquin, somebody this is her first movie that was selected at Cannes. I know her because she's the partner of my brother. And this is a very interesting movie. It's both funny and tragic and disturbing and interesting, and it talks about death and prostitution and BDSM. So if you want something different, I would recommend going to see that. So that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your insights, your story, and much more. I will see you online, and I will see you next time in person, probably. Bye then.
Very much. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.